Buzz TV is back and bigger than ever. Hi there, I'm Brian Race, the co-host for Buzz TV. We'll introduce you to our host, Ray Sivitz, who is the owner of Mountain Sweet Honey, here in just a moment. Speaking of Mountain Sweet Honey, they are our sponsor for this fine live stream. If you've never connected with them, I encourage you to do so over at mountainsweethoney.com. When you're there, not only do you get access to a lot of the education programs that are available, but you can sign up for a free newsletter that will keep you informed of great beekeeping tips, some of the things that we try to accomplish here on Buzz TV. This time of the year, maybe that special someone in your life is getting into beekeeping as a hobby, and you're starting to load up on all sorts of fun goodies, stocking stuffers for their Christmas. During the program tonight, we'll tell you a little bit more about our Beekeeping Boot Camp video that is just launched. Back in September, we had this amazing event, a day-long training that took place at Mountain Sweet Honey. It is now available so that you can watch the replay of that. It's probably one of the best ways just to get started in beekeeping, so keep watching. Who do you know that needs to know that we're on right now? Send them a quick message. We certainly would love to chat with you. You can go to the chat section on Facebook or on YouTube, share your questions, check in with us, tell us where you're watching. And again, thank you so much for being here. And without further ado, let's turn it over to Ray Sivitz. Hey, Ray.
Merry Christmas, everybody, and Merry Christmas to you, Brian. Hey, we have a big show today, and today we start out with Dr. Jaime Ellis from the University of Florida. He'll be with us discussing a year in beekeeping and what to look for as we progress through the year. Then we'll be taking a look at Russian hybrid bees, the pros and cons of those traits that the Russian hybrids have. And then we'll finish up with the Ask Ray segment, using your questions posed to me. So, Brian, let's begin the show.
Ray, I'm certainly looking forward to Christmas almost as much as you and your family. I know you've got a little one around the place, so it's going to be a big Christmas time there. Normally, in the studio, we might have the smells of peppermint and hot cocoa, but that's a distinct smell that I'm smelling today. What is that?
Well, it's lemongrass essential oil
and
tea tree essential oil. So that's what you're smelling.
And why am I smelling that instead of peppermint?
Because that's our flash sale for today.
Ah, okay. So if you keep watching,
yes,
you'll have an opportunity to get up those great little last-minute stocking stuffers of lemongrass oil and tea tree, you said?
Tea tree oil,
all right,
yes.
So keep watching. We're going to get into some important news in just a few minutes. I know you and I have had some conversations outside of the live stream about some major developments that will impact beekeepers across the world, and we're going to get to that. But you had a special guest this week, and I know people will be interested to find out about this conversation.
Yeah, Brian, what we had was one of the directors, and there's just a very few directors within the U.S. Postal Service. And he came down from Washington, D.C. to meet with me and tell us a little bit about what they're doing to help Mountain Sweet Honey ship bees to the 31 states that we ship to. And they're doing some really great things. And at the same time, an offer was made to me to come and speak to their directors in Charlotte this coming year.
For the Postal Service?
Yes.
The directors for the Postal Service, okay.
And this is everything from the regional guys upwards. So we're going to be working with senior management on how to handle bees on the local level where these guys are. And it's not only going to be for where we are, but this is going to be from coast to coast. So we're going to be working with some of the larger shippers out on the West Coast and asking because they ship bees a lot differently. They use plastic cages out there, and we use wooden cages. And there's some do's and don'ts when it comes to that. And so we're going to bring everybody up to speed within the Postal Service of what the do's and don'ts are.
Now, for somebody who's watching the live stream right now and they're thinking, why would I care that you met with some muckety-muck bigwig from the Postal Service? Explain the implications of what that means for people that order package bees.
Because there is so many shipments of bees that go through the Postal Service, it has climbed year over year. And now it's become so significant that if someone drops the ball somewhere, bees are going to die, and bee packages are going to die. And that's what the Postal Service doesn't want to see happen on their watch. So they want to get a best practices put together on a coast-to-coast format for them so that they're handling it correctly, whether they're in Los Angeles or in New York City or in San Antonio, Texas.
So as they get their best practices in place, then it just means a higher probability that when I order my bees, I'm getting everything in every bee that I ordered, not wondering, okay, how long was this sitting in a truck somewhere?
Yeah. For example, if they leave a trailer out in the heat in, let's just say, late April, where the ambient temperature is 90 degrees, well, inside that trailer,
it's brutal.
It's going to be more than 100 degrees, and that's when bees start dying. And there's been these issues in the past, but they're decreasing year over year. They're getting better and better at handling large volumes of bees.
And that means happier customers.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
and
that's
what they want to make sure is that our customers are happy, because we share that same customer.
Well, on this subject of bees and bee populations struggling or dying, I know that you've got some news to share about both Florida and something happening
in
halfway
Australia.
across the world.
Yeah, in Australia. We were doing a video conference with Thomas Clow out of New Zealand, and this was about a week or so ago. And one of my questions to Thomas was, what's happening over in Australia? If you Google anything in Australia, there's not a whole lot. It's all over 5-6 months old stuff.
Google anything. I mean, anything about what's
happening there on the ground
right.
in Australia. There's very limited news. And so Thomas gave me a little bit of the information. The Australian Department of Agriculture believes that Varroa has been there in Australia for 2 years.
So there had not been a mite infestation prior to
A detectable
infestation until the last couple of years.
Well, no, they didn't find it until about 6 months ago.
But believe that it probably has been there
But
for a
now,
while.
after
Okay,
research,
that makes sense.
They believe that Varroa has been there in Australia for 2 years.
And what is the nation going to do about this?
Well, they have set up eradication zones. And
That doesn't sound good.
No, it isn't. And unfortunately, the numbers that I'm seeing is 14,000 colonies were eradicated or burnt.
Now, for somebody like me who doesn't have a instant thought about how many bees are in a colony, when you say a colony, does that...
Well, a colony is probably, because this is summertime there right now. And so you're looking at 25,000, 30,000 bees.
And you said
hive.
14,000 colonies that are scheduled for elimination, eradication.
Have already been
extermination.
And so, again, pollination's going to take a hit with these bees not being there. And
why would a nation do something like that? I mean, because obviously here in the States, we have ways of treating. I know there was, I was looking at the Mountain Sweet Honey website earlier today, and there's a varroa mite wash kit or something that would help you with detection.
Well, what Australia is trying to do is they're trying to get ahead of this and eradicate Varroa once and for all again, and that they'll be Varroa free.
Do you think that's practical?
I don't think it is practical, because you have feral colonies that are out there that are going to incubate that Varroa, and eventually they're going to die off. But then all the diseases that colony has, and with drift going from hive to hive or from a feral colony into a hive, they're going to spread those diseases and potentially Varroa at the same time. So I think that what needs to be done now is just try to eradicate it, but knowing that you're going to have to treat your bees going forward.
I've got a good friend named Gary. He lives near Melbourne. So, Gary, if you're watching tonight, give us an update of what you're seeing there on the ground with your fellow beekeepers. We certainly are going to keep an eye on this story because it's heartbreaking to think about all those bees being exterminated.
Yes. Now, let's change a little bit here, Brian, and let's talk about Hurricane Ian and the state of Florida. You know, we had spoke to Dr. Jaime Ellis previously on this.
And he's still to come. We're going to have that interview here in just a few moments. He's with the University of Florida.
Yep. And he and his entomology group were trying to figure out what the impact was on colony loss. Well, a couple of things that we have to take in consideration is a lot of commercial beekeepers go to Florida to overwinter their bees. So it's a warmer area. They don't have to worry about frost freeze issues down there. And they break their colonies down to just a deep box with a outer cover and put it on pallets. So if you look at something like that, there, a pallet's only 4 inches off the ground. So with significant water coming from Hurricane Ian, you're going to have flooding out. And those flooding outs have really affected the commercial beekeepers.
So let's see if I can use a big word here. I have a limited vocabulary. What does that portend for this next year with regards to buying and selling bees? Will there be a lot of people trying to replace lost colonies, or what are you as a business owner that sells packaged bees?
The number that we're hearing out of Florida is at least 100,000 hives were affected by Hurricane Ian. Now, those would be commercial and backyard beekeepers. Now, the commercial guys, they've got to fulfill contracts out in California with the almonds. So normally what happens is in January, the bees are trucked from Florida all the way out to California to pollinate the almonds.
Okay.
And so they have contracts there. And my best guesstimate on this is that there's going to be a shortage on bees to go out and pollinate. And I see some of the highest prices per month being paid for beekeepers to bring in their bees to pollinate the bees, not pollinate the almonds. So
are you saying I need to run to the store and stock up on my almonds now before the price shoots up because of...
Buy your almonds now. You know, the other thing, Brian, is the almond growers out there have an issue with water restrictions in California. So they're having to cut back on their orchards out there. And so this is a deadly collision that's happening between water restrictions and lack of bees to go out and pollinate this new crop for this year. So then the ramifications even go further is those bees are normally very robust and they can start doing splits at that point and multiplying their hives out. Well, that works its way into the Texas area and even back into the Florida and Gulf of Mexico area where backyard beekeepers get their splits and start their bees. So that won't be happening because the commercial guys have got to up their stock back to where they were. So there's going to be some shortages this season. How much, I do not know. But we will see prices elevated across the board going into January and a lack of bees because of that price elevation on that side. That's what's causing the price elevation on that there.
For somebody watching tonight, I know a lot of people that do watch Buzz TV or people that have bought bees from Mountain Sweet Honey in the past. Are you recommending any changes in buying habits or getting orders in early as opposed to later? I know it's a lot of unknowns, but what advice do you have for somebody who's thinking that way?
Our inventories right now are very rock solid. So order your bees now. I can't tell you what tomorrow brings or the next hour, because we could have some of these commercial guys roll in and say, hey, I need 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 packages of bees, because they have these orders they have to fulfill out.
Right, because they have the contracts to go and do work for these folks out west.
So, it just really, and I saw Jeremy Ham with Old Florida Bee Company. He was saying, Brian, that, all the vegetation that had pollen and nectar for this time of the year in Florida is basically gone because the winds just ripped all the
I can see that
foliage off from whatever plant. And so, the interview that he was given was, hey, I've got to feed my bees or let them starve. And he's going through a gallon a week, roughly a week.
Of sugar
per
water?
hive, sugar water, 1-to-1 sugar water down there. And so, it really, when you start figuring the cost of sugar versus replacing those bees, somewhere that balance is, hey, I hope they survive, but I can't be feeding them like I'm supposed to. And maybe it's more sporadic. Instead of every week, it's every other week, and just trying to nurse them through. But even at that, you have a cost issue that you've got that's running right into you of saying, hey, how do I keep my bees, or do I just let them forage on their own and hope that they make it?
I didn't know that this was going to turn into the Ag Report.
Yeah,
I wish we had some cheerier news. Maybe when we do our next broadcast, we could have some happy bee news, because I know just with everything in the world, I need happy news, not gloom and doom.
Well, Brian, the thing is with this is that we're trying to make everybody informed and to make an informed decision. The last thing I would hate to have somebody saying, hey, I'll order my bees in February, and all the great dates are gone.
Let me put you on the spot for a second. If somebody has already ordered bees and they've, I assume, have paid for them or whatever that process is that price locked in for them and resistant to market fluctuations?
That's right.
But if you haven't ordered your bees, and with everything that Ray has just shared, then you don't know, there could be a price increase, there could be a shortage. So it does sound like the recommendation is, if you know that you need bees, go ahead and lock those in as soon as you can.
Buy now to get the best dates and the best prices.
Well, I appreciate you bringing this update. Wish we had cheerier news, but it is important to make informed decisions.
Well, let's talk about some better news.
Yes.
Here. Folks, thank you for those that were bidding on our hive for Powerhouse for Kids. Our total, with what was raised, and we'll be issuing a check this week for $3,550.
Fantastic.
I agree. It was shocking, Brian, to see those last minute bids shooting up and up. And Brian, we even went to the second place bid and said, hey, if you want, we'll go on ahead and have Shasta go on ahead and paint one a whole different way. And this wonderful woman, she said, yes, and I'll pay. It was roughly $1,050 that she had. So that was all into this number here that I just gave.
Are you going to match that too?
Yeah.
Because you promised on the live stream you'd match dollar for dollar. So that's great. Powerhouse for Kids, the charity that is receiving these funds. And thank you to the Buzz TV audience.
All right. And thank you to Shasta for the time that she put in on painting each of those.
I think she's got a career ahead of her as a designer of beehives. So you better give her a nice Christmas bonus before she starts her own business.
Brian, she has had the biggest smile on her face just seeing that this money all was going for Powerhouse for Kids. And she felt blessed by just being part of it there. Now, Brian, one of the other things that we've gotten now in is our T-shirts, our Buzz TV T-shirts. And let's go ahead and throw up a a picture of each of these with the different colors that we have. We have gray, and we also have blue.
Violet.
Violet. And so those three colors, they come in extra small to 3XL. The price on those range from $24.99 to $29.99. These are stone-washed premium T-shirts. This is something that as soon as you take it out of the box, Brian, you'll want to put it on.
Can I say on a live stream that I actually love the way that it feels next to my glorious naked body? Is that accepted? I can't say that.
No.
All right, maybe we can get the editor to. It's live. I mean, it's live. So
your mom's on the phone.
It does feel good though. It's you won't be disappointed.
Now, folks, you can order that online. Just go to mountainsweethoney.com. And then go to beekeeping supplies, then down to our gifts and books, and you'll see them there. And Brian, put a QR code on those too, so that they'll be able to snap right onto that. Or folks, you can call us at 706-886-1322, and we'll be more than happy to take your order over the phone. All right, so Brian, anything more on your side, on the news side?
Nothing that I can think of except that we've got this wonderful interview still to come with Dr. Jaime Ellis out of the University of Florida. I think you're really going to enjoy Ray's conversation with him.
But before we do that, let's do our flash sale. It's time for our flash sale, folks. And today's flash sale is on tea tree oil and lemongrass oil. These are two excellent essential oils to help the gut of your bees. Now, always remember, if you feed one hive, you have to feed all the hives within that bee yard. Otherwise, it will promote robbing. Now, let's take a look at these products. Today, it is $2 off on either one of the lemongrass oil or the tea tree oil. So you can order, Brian, 4 of each, and get $2 off per essential oil that you order there. Now, if we look at the lemongrass oil, to the left is the QR code. That QR code will take you directly to our website where you can order. But be sure to use the coupon code FEEDBEES to get your $2 off. And the same with the tea tree oil. If you look to the right of that product, you'll see a QR code, and that will also take you directly to our website. Again, use coupon code FEEDBEES for your $2 off. And folks, you can also call us at 706-886-1322, and someone in our call center will be more than happy to take your order over the phone. And folks, this is a great deal. Be sure to always feed all your hives, not just one, so that you don't promote robbing. I would like to welcome Dr. Jaime Ellis, who is with the University of Florida in the Entomology Group. Dr. Jaime, welcome to our show.
Ray, it's my pleasure to join you today.
Well, Jaime, it's a privilege to have you with us today. And I've asked you to come to our show today and fill us in on the life of a honeybee colony over a year.
Yeah, Ray, I'd be happy to do that. So this is actually a presentation that's really evolved over my years of giving it. When I first started talking about honeybee biology, the presentation was about 30 minutes. And then I was like, well, gosh, there's so many topics I don't cover. And then it expanded to 45 minutes. And before I knew it, a few years in, I had a bee biology presentation that was 2 hours. And when people would book me to speak about honeybee biology, I wouldn't let them book me for fewer than 2 hours for that talk. And then I'm like, oh gosh, this is just too long. There's too many facets of honeybee biology to throw in there, such as mating behavior of queens and drones and task of worker honeybees. And so then what I did is I excised out all of that stuff, made each of those things their own presentation, and I essentially then boiled down honeybee biology into a really short presentation where I try to kind of anthropomorphize bees, where I make the honeybee colony a lot like a human, and so that I can walk through the stages of development of a honeybee colony as if I were telling the story from birth to death of a human. So this presentation, my way of presenting honeybee biology, is kind of born out of that idea, and I call it a year in the life of a honeybee colony. And the way that it works is just what I really hope by the time I kind of get through this 10 or 15 minutes of discussion is that the beekeepers out there listening can identify what honeybee colonies are actually trying to do, what are their two main goals, what it means when a honeybee colony swarms, but also be able to match the major changes in a honeybee colony to the season in which those changes occur. And so what I tell everyone, and I think this is important to think about, is what is it that a honeybee colony is actually trying to do? Now, this is very honeybee-centric rather than beekeeper-centric. Beekeepers are trying to grow their colony strong. They're trying to make lots of honey. They're trying to pollinate crops. They might be wanting to make splits. They may be wanting to sell equipment, but all of those things are things that beekeepers want. So this talk is really about what are bees trying to do? And the bees are trying to grow their colony and do a lot like what any organism on planet Earth would try to do. So there are really two main goals that I teach beekeepers with regard to honeybee colonies. And number one is the first thing they want to do is survive winter uncompromised. And the second is to reproduce at the colony level. And I want you to just think about that from a practical standpoint. Any organism, Ray, that's alive wants to survive and it wants to reproduce, right? Everything that all organisms do, they try really hard to survive, and they try to survive so they can reproduce. And honeybee colonies aren't any different. The problem is we as beekeepers tend to look at honeybee colonies as this collection of individuals where the queen wants to have thousands of offspring and the drones want to do their thing, et cetera. But in this talk, I'm considering the colony itself as the beast. And that beast, the colony, wants to survive as a colony, but it also wants to reproduce as a colony. And I would argue, Ray, that everything that a honeybee colony does throughout the entire year is to try to maximize the likelihood of those two things, survive winter and reproduce at the colony level. So let's just start from the beginning. Swarming. Beekeepers often consider swarming a really negative thing, right? Colonies swarm in the weeks leading up to the major nectar flow. They swarm right when you need your colony to be as strong as possible. But there's a real strategic reason that colonies swarm at this time. And the strategic reason is quite simple. That cluster, that baby beehive, has to come out of the parent colony, hang in a tree, send off scouts in all directions, find a cavity that it likes, move into that cavity, build comb, and store enough honey to survive the winter that may be 6 or 8 months away. And that colony does that best if they swarm during the weeks leading up to the major nectar flow or the first few weeks of the major nectar flow, because it maximizes the resources that are available to that new colony to outfit its new nest so it can survive winter. So beekeepers, swarming is a nuisance for us because colonies are most wanting to swarm when we least need them to. But if you think about it from a colony's perspective, they swarm at that time of year to maximize their likelihood of survival because that's when the resources are available. So essentially, when you are watching a colony swarm, when you sit in your apiary and watch a colony swarm, you are watching a colony give birth. So that cluster that you see in this image is a baby bee colony. Again, I want to liken it again, the kind of the human analogy of the birth of a child, and as that child ages and reaches its reproductive years, et cetera. This is the child of a honeybee colony. A swarm is a child honeybee colony. And as I've shared, this happens typically in early spring to match the nectar flow. That child, that baby beehive, has to find that cavity, move into that cavity, and do everything it needs to do, all with the resources that are available in the typical temperate climate of about 4 to 6 weeks. Think about it. When the major nectar flow stops in spring, that colony will not have enough resources to survive the coming winter if it doesn't maximize what it does in that spring nectar flow. Sometimes you might get a summer nectar flow, sometimes you might get a fall nectar flow, but that baby bee colony is best positioned to survive and thrive if it swarms to match that first spring nectar flow, which is usually when the pollen and nectar resources are most available. And so what does that baby beehive do from there? Well, it moves into that new nest cavity and it starts outfitting it for survival. One of those survivals would be just the construction of wax. All of that incoming nectar that they're converting to honey, they also consume that and convert it to wax to make that infrastructure necessary to house baby bees, to put the pollen for storage, to put the nectar to ripen into honey. The queen will explode in her egg laying when that baby bee colony is trying to grow and gain mass, when it's what I call its toddler years, where that colony is growing kind of exponentially. And from there, the queen will begin laying eggs in the comb. They'll produce as much brood as the resources that are incoming can facilitate. They'll produce as much brood as the workers in that hive can tend. And what you get kind of in that late spring is that exponential growth of the colony. Again, if you're a parent, you'll know that kind of 2 years to 15 years of age of the child is just growth. They're putting on weight, they're growing, and that's what the honeybee colony is doing as well. And I will emphasize kind of this mid to late spring period is also when they're storing as much resources as they possibly can, because there's no guarantee that resources will be available in summer and fall to support the stores of honey that they need to survive winter. So spring is massive growth, massive weight gain in order for that colony to be positioned best for survival. And all of that really hinges on the bee colony's ability to gather nectar, convert it to honey, and store that honey. So mid to late spring, that colony is packing on as much weight and sugar as it can. Again, all with an eye towards surviving winter that you and I may think is forever away, but that is consciously in the colony's mentality, because they know they have to prepare at this time to survive the winter that's really just around the corner. So then what is summer in the life of that growing bee colony? Well, summer is when the colony becomes vulnerable to stressors. That expansive colony growth that you saw early in spring, it's kind of peaked. The resources have peaked. So the colony's hit its max size, and now it's on cruise control. So I liken this kind of those mid to late teenage years where they're stable and they're trying to stay healthy. And in the colony's case, they're combating heat. Usually they're combating increasing varroa populations and other diseases and stressors that could cause problems for them down the road. Now, as we think about that colony as it's aging, when it moves into fall, that colony is now at a point where it's readying itself to survive winter. So rather than thinking about it from a human perspective, think about it more from like the perspective of a bear. A brand new bear cub was born in spring. It's unable itself to reproduce this year. And so in spring, it's putting on weight, lots of weight. In summer, it's putting on weight. In fall, it's trying to stabilize that weight. So as that bear cub heads into winter and undergoes kind of its first hibernation, it can come out the following year and be a reproductive individual. Well, that's the honeybee colony. It's going into fall, hopefully with enough weight to be able to survive that winter that's really knocking on the doorstep. And that colony is not trying to reproduce this first season. It's simply trying to stabilize itself and maximize its chances of survival in winter. And just like the bear has to pack on weight to be able to draw on those energy reserves through hibernation, the honeybee colony has to pack on weight to draw on those energy reserves through what will be their late fall and winter hibernation period. In winter, the colony, that sleeping colony, becomes kind of lethargic. It's again, liking it to a bear cub. It's simply trying to survive winter while maximizing its usage of energy reserves, right? So it's optimization at this time. They've got all of this honey. If they overconsume it, they can't thermoregulate. If they underconsume it, they can't thermoregulate. So they have to have the right conversion of honey into energy, and that energy is the energy they need to survive winter. It's the energy they draw upon to heat that colony. So as that colony's going through winter, it's burning the honey energy to keep itself warm. But as late winter and early spring approaches, that colony starts to waken a little bit. And you're going to notice is you'll start to see pollen become available in the environment, and you'll start to see a little bit of nectar become available in the environment. So in the core, in the heart of that colony, there's brood being reared again. That queen is starting to lay eggs. That incoming pollen and incoming nectar is supporting the production of new individuals. So what looks on the outside like this contiguous cluster of bees that's not doing so much on the outside because it's still cool, on the inside of that cluster, you've got energy and excitement. You've got growth and reproduction, so that by the time that early spring rolls around, that colony has come out of winter. It is itself sexually mature, and it is able to produce its first offspring, next year's honeybee colony swarm. So if you kind of walk your way again, kind of in a summative way of thinking about this, baby bee colonies are born in spring. They pack on and as much weight as they can and grow through spring and maybe early summer. They hit a stable weight through early summer, but then try to pack on the fat that they need to survive winter kind of in early fall. They start putting on that weight so that as they cruise through winter, they've got the energy necessary to keep themselves warm. And they're doing all of this so that when spring rolls around next year, they can have their first child, that new honeybee colony swarm.
Very good. Now, I have a question to follow up on your presentation here. You were discussing swarms. What about doing splits? Because that's a artificial form of swarming. And what is your take on doing splits?
So Ray, you're spot on. Basically, a split is a controlled swarm. So this is the way that I kind of teach beekeeping to folks. To me, beekeepers need to understand biology. And I promise, Ray, I'm going to address your question, but I'm addressing it with a bit of a preamble. Beekeepers need to understand bee biology, because the best beekeepers are those who recognize what the bees are trying to do seasonally. And as the beekeeper, they match their management strategy to what the bees are trying themselves to do, and they harmonize the two, what you want to do and what the bees want to do. All right. So with that in mind, bee colonies have a natural growth cycle and have a natural time of year that they give birth, that they issue off new swarms. And beekeepers take advantage of that by creating large colonies through feeding, et cetera, and then splitting their colonies. And splits, like you say, are just controlled swarms. They're just your way of causing that colony to swarm without you having to climb a tree to capture that swarm. So I'm a huge fan of splitting to make colony increases, but it's also a reasonable way to try to stay on top of that swarm or that birthing tendency of the honeybee colony.
You know, I was taken back several years ago. A dentist came to us and he bought about 20 hives of bees, and he just kept coming in, buying more and more equipment. And I pulled him off to the side. I said, "What's going on? Your bees are going crazy." And he said, "No, I'm making splits." Well, this was in August, and not a good thing. And by October, late October, early November, they were all toast, simply be frozen out with the cold temperatures. And I kind of like to say May 1st is kind of the drop dead date here in the Southeast on doing splits to give bees adequate time to build up those stores to get through the winter. Anything later than that, you're really playing a time game that won't be very, very productive for your bees.
So Ray, kind of in that context, you're right. If you want to take advantage of the natural tendencies of colonies to, quote, want to split, that's best done in spring. And of course, there's a lot of commercial beekeepers around the U.S. who split colonies heavily in summer just because it's, colonies they're not producing honey, they're not being used to pollinate, but you've got all these bees, what to do. But if you think about it from a biological perspective, colonies swarm in spring because that's when the resources are available for them to do so, and that's also when they invest in the production of drones and sexual bees, queens and drones. So if you are going to split in summer or even early fall, which is possible depending where you are, you've got to play Mother Nature, which means that you've got to provide those resources. You are the ones who have to feed the bees because you've got to give the bees every reason to believe, every reason to want to be split and to want to be successful as a split. And so basically you're providing the resources that they're unable to get in the environment, i.e. you're feeding sugar syrup and maybe even pollen patties.
Well, let's pick up on feeding bees. What is your take on feeding bees in the off season?
So my official policy with feeding bees is you feed them when they don't have enough to survive on their own or there's nothing available in the environment. So as a beekeeper myself, what I've always tried to do is leave about a medium super's worth of honey on my colonies year round. So for example, if I'm going into spring, my standard configuration tends to be a deep with a queen excluder and a medium super on top. And I try to ensure that medium super has honey again year round. So if I'm going into spring, I'll put supers on top of that. So everything the bees make above that first super is mine to harvest. But I leave that first super on for them year round. So then my feeding strategy is when I see the resources in that medium super depleted. And what I mean by depleted is it varies a little bit throughout the year, but I'll explain it more in a moment. And when I see those resources depleted in that super, I will feed the bees. And so let me give you an example based on seasonality. So I know when my nectar flows are. I know when they occur in spring and I know when they occur in fall. So if, for example, we come through the nectar flow in spring and I've only got half a medium super's worth of honey, I know my next nectar flow is not till September, which means my bees are going to starve to death if they've only got a half a medium super of honey. They're not going to survive winter to September until that natural nectar flow starts. So I'll know I have to feed. September is when I get my next natural nectar flow. If the bees don't fill their medium super with that nectar flow, then I have to feed them to fill that super with honey, because that's what they need to survive after September, from September until next year's March. If I'm in the dead of winter, what I'll do is I regularly hoist colonies. I'll get behind them, put my hand in the bottommost notch of the bottommost box and kind of rock them forward with one hand. If it's easy to rock forward, I'll probably feed them. If it's really difficult to lift them up off the stand, then they probably have enough food. But my target is always about a medium super's worth of honey.
Very good. Now, pollen patties. Let's talk a little bit about your take on pollen patties.
Oh, you said a little bit, and I'm not sure I can do that. That's a whole nother presentation for another day, but I've got very mixed opinions about pollen patties. I will tell you that my team and I have done a lot of research on pollen patties, and we often fail to get them to do what they're advertised to do. And so what do I mean by that? So we'll feed colonies commercial diet A, we'll feed a second group of colonies commercial diet B, we'll feed a third group of colonies commercial diet C, and then we'll have a fourth group of colonies we do nothing to. And often when we do that experiment, there's no difference between any of the groups, including the group that didn't receive pollen patties. And I've talked about this a lot kind of around the country, and I get kind of jeers and sneers sometimes depending on where I say it. But what we have since done is, I've had a former student of mine, Emily Nordyke, has reviewed the literature on pollen patty research from around the world. And she summarized it in a paper that we often provide to beekeepers when they ask about it. And in that paper, we conclusively show that research on pollen patties is incredibly mixed. Sometimes they seem to benefit bees. Sometimes there's zero benefit at all. And sometimes they're a complete detriment, like feeding them to colonies can cause elevated problems like certain viruses, et cetera. So my comments on pollen patties is, as a hobbyist beekeeper, I've never had to feed colonies. I've never had to feed colonies pollen patties. There's always been enough in the environment for the colonies to do what they've needed to do. I know a lot of commercial beekeepers feed pollen patties with regularity, but I would say that the research on pollen patties is very mixed. That's kind of the bad news. The good news is, though, as I very much feel that pollen supplementation is one of the areas in honeybee research that we have the opportunity to make the greatest impact. For example, I feel like we know a bit about varroa control. We know a lot about carbohydrate management. When bees don't have carbohydrates, you just feed them sugar syrup. But I really feel like we can make significant strides in bee health if we improve the quality of the pollen supplement diets that we feed them. And so where there's a detriment, right, that they don't always work, there's an opportunity to improve them, I think, to the benefit of bee colonies everywhere.
Well, Jaime, I want to thank you for coming on today to our show. Please tell us how we can catch you on your podcast.
Yeah, my team and I have a podcast called Two Bees and a Podcast, and it's pretty easy to find. We're on all the standard podcast platforms. Also, if you just Google University of Florida Honeybee, you'll get to our lab's website where all of our resources are itemized and available for you guys to peruse. So thank you so much, Ray, for having me on this episode.
Thanks again, Jaime. Okay, folks, again, our flash sale is on tea tree oil and lemongrass oil. These are both essential oils, and they will be great for your bees. Your bees will love it. You'll even smell the lemongrass oil when you come into your apiary. This is a great thing to do for your bees. But remember, you can't feed one hive. You got to feed all your hives in your apiary. So be sure you do that so you don't encourage robbing between your bees. Use coupon code FEEDBEES for your $2 off. If you look at the bottom of the slide here with lemongrass oil, on the left is a QR code. Use your smartphone and it will take you straight to our website where you can order the lemongrass oil. If you want to order the tea tree oil also, use the QR code on the right side and that will take you there. And if all else fails, folks, you can call us at 706-886-1322 and talk to someone in our call center, and they'll be more than happy to take your order over the phone. And that's a savings of $2 per bottle. Folks, take advantage of this while we're here on the air, and this will be good through Sunday. Folks, let's take a moment and look at the traits of the Russian hybrid queen. Let's go to the first slide. One of the things that you can count on with a Russian queen or a Russian hybrid queen is the markings will not be the same as what you would find with an Italian honeybee. The color will differentiate between a chocolate color to a pitch black color on the abdomen. Let's go to slide 2. One of the things that you will find with a Russian hybrid or a Russian queen is that they're more defensive as a honeybee. I would not recommend Russian hybrid queens or colonies to a new beginning beekeeper. These bees are to be handled by an experienced beekeeper with at least 2 or 3 years of beekeeping experience. The reason being is if you drop a frame with bees on it, they will come after you and they will try to sting you. So that is the reason why new beekeepers, I would say not to go in the direction of the Russian hybrid. Now, with that said, the hybrids are very good at nectar collection. They fly on overcast days versus the Italian honeybees will be held up in the hive waiting for clearer days. So when we look at higher nectar collection, that means that that hive is also going to have a higher honey production. Now, when we look at the brood production, that will not begin until there is sufficient pollen coming into the hive. So they're going to be a late starter than what the Italian honeybees would be. But once they get started, they're very explosive. And once they get started on the brood production, you'll begin to see swarm cells. And they keep swarm cells going throughout the nectar periods. So Here in the Southeast, we would be looking everywhere from March all the way through to June with swarm cells. They are very easy to swarm if they run out of room in the hive. Now, let's look at the last slide here. Requeening an Italian hive can be difficult because of the high failure rate due to the pheromones are quite different between the Italian colony and a Russian colony. So a beekeeper does need to be careful on trying to introduce a Russian queen into an Italian colony. Now, with that said, Russian bees are very good in cold climates. And the reason being is they are late brood rearing producers going into the fall. And that means they will have larger colonies going into the winter months. So my take on Russian hybrids is that they're great for upper elevations in cold areas, much like in the upper Midwest and in the New England area. So these two areas would be very, very good climates for the Russian hybrid.
I do think this is my favorite segment of the show just because we get a little bit of interaction. I get a little more screen time than normal, and we get to answer your questions. So I appreciate everybody who has gone in the chat there on Facebook, on YouTube. If your question doesn't get answered, it might on our next broadcast. Now, Ray, here's the first one, and this comes from Sandy in Bangor, Maine. Is it better to have an upper entrance for the bees or a lower entrance for the bees?
Well, this is a great question because this does come up, Brian, on multiple occasions. The one thing that you should understand on the colony is that you have guard bees, and there's a limited number of guard bees in each colony. So if you have 2 entry points, it takes twice as many.
So your
bees.
forces are divided.
Yeah. And so I've never seen very good success with having an upper and a lower access to a hive. Now, with that said, there should always be a ventilation part at the top of the hive on the inner cover notched out, but that should not be considered an access point to the.
And do you have a preference of one over the other, or does the seasonality make a difference? If you had to choose lower or upper, how do you make that decision?
I would keep it real simple, Brian, and just keeping your standard entryway at the bottom of the hive, and the bees will use that very, very well.
Okay. Sandy, thank you for that question.
Yes.
We certainly appreciate it. Gary in Cleveland, Ohio. Okay, so it's winter time.
Yes.
He wants to know, would blankets or heating pads be beneficial? This is going to be Gary's first winter keeping bees, and he wants to know, I guess, a question about insulation.
Well, there's a lot of simple ways of doing this, Brian. I've even seen people put bales of hay around and over top of the hive itself, and all the R factor insulation that's there with roughly 2 feet of hay that's there. Now, what you would do is you'd put a piece of plywood over the top of it and then put hay on top of that. You could put a blanket. There are some blankets that you can get that would slide right on over, but there's always going to be a gap there to allow the coolness of the season to come in. I have seen people use heating pads up underneath the bottom board and allow the heat to go up through on that there. The only problem is trying to keep those electrical connections dry so they don't short out during the winter months.
Any danger in using regular insulation that you might use in your home? Does it have to be a natural type like the bales of hay, or could some Pink Panther do the job?
If you used interior type of insulation, it's going to get wet.
Okay.
So it has to be in an envelope that is normally plastic so that it sheds the water away from the hive itself.
That's why he's the expert. It is the Ask Ray segment here on Buzz TV. Our next question, John from Nashville, Tennessee. What is the difference between requeening a hive and adding a queen?
Okay. I would say sometimes they're the same, sometimes they're not. Requeening specifically comes down to the previous queen that was in that hive has failed for whatever reason, or they're just extremely ornery bees, and that's when you would take the old queen out under those conditions, pinch her, let the hive be queenless for a couple hours.
Pincher. I have to stop you there.
Yes.
That's a term that, as a new beekeeper, I'm not familiar with that.
What that simply is, Brian, is you get the queen in your fingers and you pinch her until she dies.
Oh, okay.
And that's
And why am I killing the queen?
Because she is producing very ornery brood,
Okay.
or she's beginning to fail in her brood production.
All right.
Okay.
Has nothing to do with Harry and Meghan or anything
No,
like that.
no,
Okay,
Brian.
just checking. Did I give you sufficient time to answer? I interrupted your question there.
The other point on requeening is your queen just comes up missing for whatever reason. Maybe another insect like a European hornet has come in and has killed quite a few of the colony as well as the queen. And that's kind of an emergency where you put another queen in there.
Yusef is not too far from where we are. He is in Westminster, South Carolina, or as the locals say, Westminster.
Yes.
But either way, I've been hearing a lot of chatter about thermal cameras. What are they exactly, and do I need to get one?
All right. I would say for a beekeeper that's up in very frigidness of the Northeast or upper Midwest, this would be an excellent tool to use. FLIR is probably the best. We have that in our arsenal of videography. And what it allows you to do, Brian, is to take your smartphone, point it at the hive, and you can actually see the warmness within the hive, the colony ball that is on the inside. And it's just really cool to be able to see that on a smart screen phone.
So when I'm watching television with my mother and she has all of her FBI crime dramas on, and all of a sudden they have the infrared and there's 3 bodies on the upper level and it looks like the package is on the lower level, similar technology just designed to help you with your bees?
Yep, it is.
All right. Very cool. Our final question, Ray, is from my hometown of Huntsville, Alabama.
Okay.
Tanya, who lives there, wants to know, what are the advantages of using the Hive Alive product that we've mentioned here on the show several times in the past, versus sugar water or some other type of food?
Okay. Sugar water is basically used to hydrate our bees and for them to produce more wax through their wax glands. Now, with that said, that's about all that sugar water really does. Now, when you add Hive Alive, now you've put amino acids back in, you've put protein back into the bee, so it's a more robust feed than just feeding sugar water.
Okay, so you do recommend that Hive Alive. And of all the products out there, is that one that has just risen to the top for you? Or
Yes.
Okay,
Yes,
so
it has.
very cool. Hive Alive. Hey, if you have a question, there's multiple ways to get it to us. A very easy way is just to email us, buzztv at mountainsweethoney.com. Our sponsor, of course, Mountain Sweet Honey. We'd love to answer your question on a future edition of our live stream, buzztv at mountainsweethoney.com, and ask Ray.
All right, folks, this is our last call on this item for our flash sale. Today through Sunday, we are offering tea tree oil and lemongrass oil, both essential oils that your bees will absolutely love. It's great for their gut and digestion. All right, let's look at the slide here. Lemongrass oil, if you look at the QR code to the left, use your smartphone and put it on the picture setting, and it will take you straight to our website. The same with the tea tree oil. It is on to the right of there, the QR code. use the coupon code FEEDBEES for your $2 off. And again, if you don't want to do that, please call us. And our number is 706-886-1322. And one of our customer service representatives will be more than happy to take your order over the phone. 706-886-1322. Our next broadcast will be January the 19th at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We will be welcoming Thomas Clow with Ciracel out of New Zealand. Folks, they got some new products that they're bringing into the market, and we as beekeepers will be very interested in seeing what these two new products are. We'll also be looking at what we as beekeepers need to be doing during the winter months and taking care of our bees. And of course, we're going to keep an eye on what's happening in Florida with the bee loss down there through Hurricane Ian. So we'll be keeping an eye on that, as well as what's happening in Australia. So that's what's on the next show, January the 19th at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.
Well, I'm afraid that just about wraps up this edition of Buzz TV. What a fun episode it has been. My name is Brian Race, Ray Sivitz here as well. Thank you to Dr. Jaime Ellis from the Entomology Department at the University of Florida. What a great guest, just loaded with knowledge. I can pretty much guarantee we will have him on some future episodes. Well, Ray, my friend, it's beginning to look a lot like and sound a lot like Christmas. It's almost here.
You are right, Brian. And folks, may the Christ of Christmas be ever so close to you and your home through these holidays.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Happy New Year.